Blood washes out of linen, but paranoia that stains the stomach. Everyone thinks running a criminal empire is about power and violence. It's actually about indigestion. When you survive a poisoning, every 5-star meal tastes like battery acid. He was wasting away. A ghost in a tailored suit, starving to death in a mansion filled with caviar. Then came a girl who didn't know how to cook for a king. She only knew how to feed a broken man. Another plate hit the trash. This one was a seared duck breast with a cherry reduction. It cost more than most people made in a day. Vincent watched it slide off the porcelain and land on a pile of equally expensive, equally untouched failures. "You have to eat, boss," Enzo said. His voice was quiet, careful. Nobody spoke loudly in the dining room anymore. Vincent didn't answer. He picked up his glass of scotch, stared at the amber liquid, and put it back down. Even the smell of the alcohol made his stomach clench. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the hard wood press against his spine. There wasn't much padding left between his skin and his bones. His suits, bespoke and imported from Milan, hung on him like hand-me-downs. "Tell Laurent to pack his knives," Vincent said, his voice a low rasp. "That's the 3rd chef this month. Then find a 4th. Vincent stood up. A wave of dizziness hit him, tilting the edges of his vision into blackness. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table until his knuckles turned white, waiting for the room to stop spinning. He breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth. It had been 6 months since the hit. They hadn't used bullets. Bullets were loud. Bullets drew cops. Instead, an ambitious underboss had slipped a heavy metal cocktail into Vincent's espresso. It was a slow, agonizing burn. It chewed through his stomach lining, wrecked his nervous system, and left him confined to a hospital bed for 8 weeks. He survived. The underboss did not. But survival was a technicality. Vincent's body had developed a vicious, trauma-induced rejection of food. Every time he tried to eat, his brain screamed poison. The nausea would hit sharp and violently real. He lived on black coffee antacids and a few forced bites of dry toast. He was 34 years old. He ruled the largest syndicate on the eastern seaboard. And he was slowly, surely starving to death. Downstairs, completely unaware of the dying king above her, Nora wrung out a sponge. Dirty grey water splashed into the yellow plastic bucket. She wiped her forehead with the back of a rubber-gloved hand, leaving a streak of soapy residue on her skin. Her knees ached. Her lower back was one solid knot of tension. Scrubbing the foyer of the Rossi estate was a nightmare. The marble was porous, demanding constant back-breaking labor. But Nora wasn't in a position to complain. You didn't complain when you owed 50 grand to a loan shark who liked to break fingers for late payments. Her brother's gambling habit had bought her this life. When he skipped town, the debt fell to her. Working for Vincent's legitimate front company as a nighttime cleaner paid triple the going rate. It was hazard pay. She knew what went on behind the high walls and security gates. She just kept her head down. Nora moved to the next tile. Scrub, wipe, dry. She was invisible here. Just another uniform in the background. The armed guards in the hallways ignored her. The arrogant, high-strung chefs in the kitchen yelled at her if she got in their way. She preferred it that way. Invisibility was safety. "Hey, bucket girl." Nora paused. She looked up. One of the night guards, a bulky man with a flattened nose, was pointing down the hall. "Somebody spilled wine in the east corridor. Clean it up before it sets." Nora nodded once. She didn't speak. She picked up the heavy bucket and started walking. Her stomach gave a loud, hollow rumble. She ignored it. She hadn't eaten since noon, a cheap granola bar on the bus ride over. Food was fuel, and right now she was running on fumes. She reached the east corridor. The spill was near the main kitchen doors. As she knelt to soak up the red wine, the heavy, swinging doors burst open. Laurent, the current head chef, stormed out. He was red-faced, untying his apron with frantic, angry jerks. "Philistines!" Laurent shouted at nobody in particular. "I am an artist. I do not cook for a corpse with no palate." He threw his apron on the floor, nearly hitting Nora in the face, and marched toward the exit. Nora stared at the crumpled apron. Then she looked through the swinging doors into the kitchen. It was empty. The stainless steel prep tables were covered in discarded ingredients, half-chopped vegetables, expensive cuts of meat left to warm. She finished cleaning the wine spill. She stood up. Her shift wasn't over for another 3 hours. Her stomach growled again, a sharp, twisting pain. She pushed the door open and stepped into the kitchen. The kitchen was a cavern of chrome and white tile. The air smelled of wasted potential truffle oil, scorched butter, and panic. Nora walked past a station where a beautifully seared piece of Wagyu beef sat abandoned on a cutting board. Her mouth watered, but she didn't touch it. She knew the rules. You steal from this house, you don't leave it. But surely they wouldn't care about the scraps, the things destined for the garbage. She found a small bruised onion, a few limp carrots left in a colander, the carcass of a roasted chicken that had been stripped of its prime meat, leaving only the bones and a few shreds of dark meat clinging to the joints. It was garbage, but to Nora it was dinner. She found a small saucepan. She turned on a back burner. The blue flame hissed to life. She moved quickly, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent her whole life making something out of nothing. She tossed the chicken bones into the pot, let them heat until they sizzled and the residual fat began to melt. She chopped the bruised onion, tossing it in. The sharp, pungent smell filled her space, masking the rich, overwhelming odors of the chef's failed dinner. She crushed a clove of garlic with the flat of a knife and threw it in skins and all. Water. Salt. A handful of leftover rice she found in a plastic container. She brought it to a boil, then dropped it to a simmer. It wasn't culinary art. It was survival food. It was what her mother used to make when the heating bill took the grocery money. A peasant broth, thick, salty, and incredibly warm. She leaned against the counter, watching the steam rise. For the first time all night, she felt a sliver of comfort. She found a plain white ceramic bowl and a chipped spoon in the dish pit. She ladled the broth into the bowl. It was golden brown, dotted with small pools of fat smelling strongly of garlic and black pepper. Nora lifted the spoon. The kitchen door slammed open. Nora jumped, splashing hot broth onto her wrist. She gasped, backing away from the counter. Enzo stood in the doorway. He looked exhausted. The deep bags under his eyes made him look 10 years older than he was. He scanned the empty kitchen, his eyes darting over the mess Laurent had left behind. Then he stopped. He sniffed the air. He walked toward Nora. She froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She was going to be fired. Or worse, Enzo didn't even look at her face. He looked at the bowl on the counter. Steam curled off the surface of the golden broth. Laurent made this before he bolted, Enzo asked, his voice rough. Nora opened her mouth. Her throat was completely dry. "No, good enough," Enzo interrupted. He didn't care. He was desperate. He grabbed a small serving tray, slammed the bowl onto it, snatched a clean silver spoon from a drawer, and turned on his heel. "Wait." Nora stepped forward. "That's just scraps. It's garbage." Enzo didn't stop. The door swung shut behind him. Nora stood in the quiet kitchen, staring at the empty counter. Her dinner was gone. More importantly, she had just fed a Mafia boss a bowl of literal garbage water, made from chicken bones and bruised onions. She closed her eyes. "They're going to kill me." Upstairs, the heavy oak doors of the master study were closed. Vincent sat at his desk. The room was dark, lit only by a single green glass banker's lamp. Spread out before him were the weekly ledgers from the docks, numbers, profits, losses. He stared at them until they blurred. His stomach gave a vicious, rolling cramp. He squeezed his eyes shut, pressing a hand hard against his abdomen. The door opened. Enzo walked in, carrying a tray. "Take it away," Vincent said, not looking up. "You haven't eaten in 2 days, boss." I said, "Take it away, Enzo." Enzo set the tray down on the desk, right over the ledgers. "I'm not leaving until you try it." Vincent glared at his underboss. Enzo didn't flinch. He was loyal to a fault. Vincent looked down at the bowl. He expected to see another heavy, rich, nauseating plate of French nonsense. Instead, he saw a simple, cloudy broth. A few translucent pieces of onion floated near the surface. He waited for the nausea. He waited for his throat to close up. It didn't. The smell drifted up. It didn't smell like money. It smelled like home. It smelled like the tiny apartment his grandmother used to rent in Brooklyn. It smelled like garlic and salt. Simple. Uncomplicated. Safe. Vincent reached for the spoon. His hand was trembling slightly. He noticed it. He hated it. He gripped the silver handle tighter to steady it. He dipped the spoon into the hot broth and brought it to his lips. He took a sip. The broth hit his tongue. It was intensely savory. The black pepper gave it a sharp kick, cutting through the dull metallic taste that had coated his mouth for 6 months. It washed down his throat. Vincent waited for his stomach to revolt. He braced himself for the cramp, the urgent need to vomit. Silence. His stomach, bruised and battered, accepted the warmth. It didn't burn. It just felt full. Vincent exhaled a long, shaky breath. He dipped the spoon in again. Then again. He didn't speak. He just ate. He ate the rice. He drank every drop of the broth. The bowl clinked against the tray as he set the spoon down. It was completely empty. He leaned back in his leather chair. The cold sweat that usually accompanied a meal never came. A faint flush of color crept into his pale cheeks. Enzo stared at the empty bowl, his eyes wide. He looked like he had just witnessed a miracle. "Laurent," Vincent said quietly. "What? Laurent made this?" Enzo swallowed hard. "Actually, boss, Laurent quit. Walked out 20 minutes ago." Vincent's eyes snapped to Enzo. They were sharp. The fog of starvation was lifting, just a fraction, revealing the ruthless intelligence underneath. "Then who made this?" Enzo shifted uncomfortably. "One of the cleaners down there." She was standing next to it. Vincent stared at the empty bowl. "Bring her to me." Nora was packing her meager belongings into her canvas tote bag. She had stripped off her rubber gloves. Her hands were shaking. She had spent the last 30 minutes waiting for a bullet to the back of the head. The kitchen doors opened. Enzo stood there. "Come with me," he said. Nora gripped her bag. "I swear I didn't poison it. I was hungry. It was for me." "Just walk," Enzo said. He led her out of the kitchen, past the marble foyer she had just scrubbed, and up the grand sweeping staircase. The carpets were thick enough to swallow the sound of her cheap, scuffed sneakers. The walls were lined with dark oil paintings. The air up here felt heavy, expensive, dangerous. They reached the end of a long hallway. Enzo knocked once on a heavy oak door and pushed it open. He motioned for Nora to go inside. She stepped over the threshold. The office was massive. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the night. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat Vincent. Nora had only ever seen him from a distance, stepping out of a black SUV, walking quickly through the lobby surrounded by men. Up close, the reality of him was jarring. He was strikingly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features and dark hair swept back from his face. But he looked like a ruin. The skin tightened over his cheekbones. Dark, bruised shadows rested under his eyes. He didn't look like a terrifying crime boss. He looked like a man who was dying from the inside out. Vincent studied her. He took in her faded uniform, the bleach stains on her pants, the raw red skin of her hands. "What is your name?" His voice was raspy, dry. "Nora. Nora Bennett. You made the soup." It wasn't a question. "I'm sorry," Nora blurted out. The fear finally spilled over. "I know I shouldn't have touched the food. It was garbage, I swear. I only used the scraps Laurent was going to throw away. I was just cold and hungry. You can fire me. Just please don't hurt me." Vincent watched her panic with absolute stillness. He didn't blink. When she finally ran out of breath, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "What was in it?" he asked. Nora blinked. "What?" "The recipe. What did you put in it?" "Chicken bones, a bruised onion, garlic, salt, pepper, water." She listed them off mechanically. "Some leftover rice." Vincent kept staring at her. "No heavy cream, no truffle, no wine reduction." "No, sir, just water." Vincent looked at the empty bowl sitting on his desk. He reached out and touched the rim with his index finger. "For 6 months." Vincent said quietly, almost to himself, "The best chefs in the city have tried to feed me. Men with Michelin stars. Men who charge $1,000 a plate. Every single thing they put in front of me tasted like ash and copper. My own body fights me." He lifted his eyes, pinning her in place. "Your garbage water is the first thing I've kept down since November." Nora didn't know what to say. She stood perfectly still. "You're done cleaning floors," Vincent said. He opened a drawer, pulled out a checkbook and a heavy gold pen. "You work for me now. Directly. Doing what? Cooking. Only for me. Nobody else touches my food. Nobody else enters that kitchen when you are preparing my meals. You will make exactly what you made tonight. Simple. Uncomplicated." He wrote a number on a check and ripped it out. He held it up. Nora hesitated, then stepped forward and took it. She looked at the number. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a month's pay for a normal person, written for a single week of work. "I'm not a chef," Nora said, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to cook fancy food. I only know how to make cheap meals." "I don't want fancy," Vincent said. The exhaustion in his voice was suddenly overwhelming. He leaned back, closing his eyes. "I want to live." "Can you do that, Nora? Can you keep me alive?" Nora looked at the man. Stripped of the terrifying aura of his reputation, she saw what he truly was in this room. A hostage to his own ruined body. He wasn't asking her for a culinary masterpiece. He was asking for a lifeline. She looked at the check. It would pay off her brother's debt in a matter of months. She would be safe. "I need ingredients," Nora said, her voice steadying. "Real ones, not scraps." Vincent opened his eyes. A faint ghost of a smirk touched the corner of his mouth. "Enzo will give you whatever you need, and I want my own key to the kitchen. Nobody comes in while I'm working. Not even your guards." Vincent tilted his head. He was a man used to giving orders, not receiving demands from women in bleach-stained clothes. But the dull ache in his stomach had been replaced by a quiet, steady warmth. He was willing to concede. "Done. I'll start tomorrow morning," Nora said. "No," Vincent said. He sat up slightly. The hunger dormant for so long was beginning to wake up. It was a terrifying, violent sensation. "Start now. Make me something else." Nora looked at him. She didn't see a mob boss. She saw a starving man. "Okay," she said softly. "Give me 20 minutes." She walked out of the office. Enzo was waiting in the hall. He looked at her, his eyebrows raised in a silent question. "He wants more," Nora said. Enzo exhaled a breath he looked like he'd been holding for a year. Thank God. Nora went back down to the kitchen. The vast empty space didn't intimidate her anymore. She locked the heavy doors from the inside. She washed her hands, tied a clean white apron around her waist, over her uniform, and went to the massive walk-in refrigerator. She bypassed the caviar. She ignored the prime cuts of beef. She found a block of sharp cheddar cheese, a loaf of sourdough bread, butter, a basket of ripe tomatoes. She went to the stove. She melted the butter. The sizzle echoed in the quiet kitchen. She placed the bread down, assembling the sandwich with careful, deliberate movements. She chopped the tomatoes, crushing them into a small pot with a dash of heavy cream, basil, and salt. It was a grilled cheese and tomato soup, a child's meal, a comfort food designed to soothe, not impress. When she carried the tray back up to the office, Vincent was exactly where she had left him. He watched her set the tray down. The golden brown crust of the bread, the rich red soup. He didn't dismiss her this time. "Sit," he ordered, pointing to a leather armchair opposite his desk. Nora sat down. She kept her hands in her lap. Vincent picked up the sandwich. The cheese stretched as he pulled it apart. He dipped a corner into the soup. He put it in his mouth. Nora watched him close his eyes. She watched the tension bleed out of his shoulders. She watched the ruthless, terrifying leader of a criminal empire eat a grilled cheese sandwich like it was communion bread. He ate the entire thing in silence. He drank the soup straight from the bowl. When he finished, he wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. He looked across the desk at Nora. "Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., Vincent said. "Eggs. How do you like them?" Nora asked. "I don't care," Vincent replied, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Just make them taste like that." Nora nodded. She stood up and took the empty tray. As she walked to the door, she glanced back. Vincent was already looking at his ledgers again, but the deathly pallor was gone from his skin. The ghost had color. She closed the heavy oak door behind her. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. 7 a.m. arrived with the sharp hiss of a cast-iron skillet hitting a gas flame. Nora didn't use the non-stick pans. She didn't use the expensive copperware that hung from the ceiling rack like useless jewelry. She dug out a heavy, seasoned iron pan from the bottom cabinet. It was black-pitted and held the memory of 1,000 meals. She dropped a thumb-sized knob of butter into the center. It foamed, instantly turning a nutty brown. She cracked 3 eggs one-handed, letting the shells fall into a steel bowl. The whites hit the hot butter and spat furiously, curling into crispy golden-brown lace around the edges. She lowered the heat. She didn't scramble them. She didn't fold them into a pretentious French omelette. She fried them hard on the bottom, leaving the yolks warm and heavy. The kitchen doors clicked open. The lock turned from the outside. Nora stiffened. She gripped the handle of the spatula. Her agreement with Vincent was absolute. Nobody entered the kitchen while she cooked. Footsteps sounded on the tile. Heavy, deliberate. Vincent walked around the center island. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket today. Just a crisp white shirt. The collar undone, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He still looked gaunt. The shadow of death still clung to the hollows of his cheeks. But he was walking under his own power. He didn't lean on the walls. He pulled out a high steel stool and sat at the butcher block island. He didn't say a word. He just rested his forearms on the wood and watched her. Nora exhaled slowly. She let go of her death grip on the spatula. "You're supposed to be upstairs," she said, keeping her voice even. "I grew tired of the study," Vincent replied. His voice had lost some of the dry, scraping rasp from the night before. It was deeper now, resonant. Nora didn't argue. You didn't argue with a man who could order your death with a twitch of his finger. She slid the eggs onto a plain ceramic plate. She added 2 thick slices of toasted sourdough, dry, right next to the yolks. She pushed the plate across the island. Vincent looked at the eggs. He didn't reach for a fork. He picked up a piece of toast, broke the yolk, and let the thick orange liquid soak into the bread. He took a bite. He chewed slowly. His eyes fluttered shut for a fraction of a second. It was a microscopic tell, a crack in his terrifying armor. Nora turned her back to him to clean the skillet. She needed the physical barrier. Watching him eat felt entirely too intimate. It felt like watching an animal take its first meal after escaping a trap. Over the next 3 weeks, a rhythm established itself. The rhythm was quiet. It was built on salt, fat, and heat. Week 1 was survival. Broths, scrambled eggs, mashed potatoes whipped with heavy cream and roasted garlic. Food that required zero effort to digest. Food that coated the stomach and tricked the brain into feeling safe. Week 2 was rebuilding. Roasted chicken thighs with crisp skin. Flaky white fish seared in lemon and butter. Thick, hearty stews cooked low and slow for 8 hours until the meat dissolved on the tongue. By week 3, the ghost was gone. Vincent's suits had to be tailored again. This time to let them out. The terrifying, hollowed-out skull face filled out. Color returned to his skin, a healthy olive undertone that bespoke his heritage. He stopped walking like a man made of glass. He moved with a predatory, silent grace that put everyone in the house on a razor's edge. Everyone except Nora. To her, he was just a mouth to feed. She chopped carrots with rhythmic, hollow thwacks of her knife against the cutting board. She was making a beef bourguignon, not the stuffy restaurant kind. A rustic, ugly, deeply savory version that smelled like a cold winter night. Vincent walked into the kitchen. It was 2 p.m. He sat in his usual spot at the island. This was the new normal. He conducted his business in the study, issued his orders, destroyed his enemies, and then he came down here. He never spoke much. He just sat in the warmth of the ovens, inhaling the scent of whatever she was making. "Russo came by the docks today," Vincent said. Nora's knife stopped. The blade hovered an inch above a carrot. Russo. The loan shark. The man holding her brother's debt. The man who had sent 2 thugs to wait outside her apartment 3 months ago, leaving her with a bruised rib and a warning. She resumed chopping. Faster this time. "I mailed him a cashier's check yesterday. I'm ahead on the payments." "I know," Vincent said. He watched her hands. He watched the white-knuckle grip she had on the knife handle. "He mentioned you. Said it was a shame a pretty girl was wasting her life scrubbing floors to pay off a degenerate's marker." Nora scraped the carrots into a cast-iron Dutch oven. The meat sizzled angrily as the cold vegetables hit the fat. "He's getting his money. He has no reason to talk about me." "He's a scavenger," Vincent said flatly. "Scavengers don't care about the rules. They care about leverage. He thinks holding your debt gives him a line into my house." Nora turned to face him. Her heart gave a slow, heavy thud against her ribs. She wiped her hands on her apron. "I haven't told him anything. I swear, I dropped the check in the mail. I don't speak to him." Vincent's dark eyes locked onto hers. There was no anger in them, just a cold, terrifying calculation. "I know Nora. If I thought you were talking to him, you wouldn't be making dinner." He said it so casually, a simple statement of fact. "If you betrayed me, you would be dead." The blunt honesty of it was chilling. It ripped away the illusion of domesticity they had built in this kitchen. He wasn't a patron of her cooking. He was a warlord, and she was an asset. "So what happens now?" Nora asked. Her voice was steady, but her hand shook slightly as she grabbed a wooden spoon. "Nothing," Vincent said. He stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, a charcoal grey wool that fit him perfectly. "The debt is handled." "Handled," Nora frowned. "I owe him $30,000 still. I have a payment plan." "You owed him," Vincent corrected. "Past tense. He won't be collecting from you anymore. From now on, you only owe me." He turned and walked out of the kitchen. Nora stared at the swinging doors. The smell of searing beef filled the air, but her stomach suddenly felt entirely hollow. She was free of the scavenger. But she had just been bought by the lion. 2 nights later, the illusion shattered completely. Nora was making pasta, fresh linguine. It was a physical, demanding process. She pushed her weight into the dough, stretching it, folding it over itself, working the gluten until it was smooth and elastic. There was flour dusted across the butcher block, across her forearms, and a smudge of it on her cheek. The house felt different tonight. Usually the estate was quiet, a muffled, insulated silence. Tonight it hummed. Doors opened and closed upstairs. Heavy boots moved quickly across the marble floors. Enzo had rushed through the kitchen an hour ago, his face pale and tight, ignoring her completely as he grabbed a bottle of iodine from the first aid cabinet. Nora kept her head down. She rolled the dough through the steel machine, catching the thin yellow ribbons as they extruded from the bottom. She tossed the pasta in a nest of semolina flour. She wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. Crash. The sound came from the dining room. It wasn't a dropped plate. It sounded like a piece of heavy furniture splintering against a wall. Nora froze. She reached over and turned off the boiling water. Silence crept back into the kitchen, thick and suffocating. Then came the shouting, a man's voice, pleading. "Vincent, please, I swear on my mother, I didn't know about the shipment. They held a gun to my head." Nora backed away from the counter. She pressed her spine against the stainless steel double-door refrigerator. The cold metal seeped through her thin shirt. A heavy, wet thud followed. The pleading turned into a ragged, wet cough. "You let them take the shipment, Leo." Vincent's voice drifted through the swinging doors. It wasn't the quiet, exhausted voice Nora knew. It wasn't the voice that asked for eggs and toast. It was low, vibrating with a terrible, absolute authority. It was the voice of a man who commanded violence as easily as he commanded a room. "You let them take $3 million of my product, and you didn't call me. My family. Your family is safe because I allow it," Vincent interrupted. The coldness in his tone made the hair on Nora's arms stand up. "You are not." Another thud, a sickening crunch of bone. Nora clamped a hand over her mouth. Her breathing was loud in the quiet kitchen. She squeezed her eyes shut. Invisibility is safety. Invisibility is safety. She repeated the mantra in her head. She was just the cook. She didn't hear anything. She didn't see anything. The dining room went silent. Minutes ticked by. The silence stretched until it felt like a physical weight pressing down on the kitchen. The swinging doors banged open. Nora jumped, letting out a sharp gasp. Vincent stood in the doorway. He was breathing heavily. His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt was rolled up to the elbows. His knuckles were split red and raw. A fine mist of crimson freckled his right cheek. His eyes were wide, dark, and utterly feral. The pupil had swallowed the iris. The beast was entirely unchained. He looked at Nora. For a terrifying second, he didn't recognize her. He looked at her the way a wolf looks at a rabbit that has accidentally wandered into the den. The violence was still humming under his skin, begging for an outlet. Nora didn't run. Running triggers the chase. She stayed perfectly still against the refrigerator. She slowly lowered her hand from her mouth. "The water," she said. Her voice was a bare whisper. It trembled, betraying her terror. "The water is off. Dinner will be late." Vincent stared at her. The violent, manic energy in his eyes slowly, agonizingly began to recede. He blinked. Once. Twice. The sharp focus returned. He looked down at his hands. He saw the blood, a muscle feathered in his jaw. He looked disgusted. Not at the violence, but at the fact that she was seeing it. That the dirty reality of his empire had bled into the one clean room in his house. He walked to the large industrial sink in the corner. He turned on the hot water. He grabbed a scrub brush and a bottle of heavy-duty dish soap. He stood with his back to her, scrubbing his hands with a vicious, punishing intensity. The water running down the drain turned pale pink, then clear. Nora pushed herself off the refrigerator. Her legs felt weak. She walked over to the stove. She turned the burner back on. The blue flame hissed. "I didn't mean to bring this down here," Vincent said. He didn't turn around. He leaned over the sink, his hands gripping the metal edge. His voice was exhausted again. The adrenaline crash was hitting him. "You didn't," Nora said softly. "It's your house. This room is yours." He finally turned to face her. The blood was gone from his hands, but his knuckles were badly bruised. The crimson speck on his cheek remained. Nora grabbed a clean linen towel. She ran it under warm water, wringing it out. She walked slowly toward him. She felt like an animal trainer stepping into the enclosure. One wrong move and the teeth would come out. She stopped in front of him. He was a full head taller than her. She held out the damp towel. "Your face," she said. Vincent looked at the towel. He looked at her. He didn't take the cloth. Instead, he leaned down just a fraction, bringing his face closer to hers. He was offering himself, permitting her into his space. Nora swallowed hard. She reached up. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed the warm, damp cloth against his cheekbone. She wiped away the smear of Leo's blood. The skin beneath was hot, radiant with adrenaline. Vincent closed his eyes as she cleaned his face. His breathing slowed. The terrifying mob boss melted away, leaving only a bruised, exhausted man standing in a quiet kitchen. "Sit down," Nora whispered. "I'll finish the pasta." Vincent sat at the butcher block island. He watched her work. He felt entirely hollowed out. The rage that had fueled him upstairs was gone, leaving behind a cold, metallic emptiness. It was the same emptiness that used to precede the agonizing nausea. His stomach gave a warning twitch, a phantom cramp. His body remembered the poison. His body expected punishment after violence. Nora moved with quiet efficiency. She dropped the fresh linguine into the boiling salted water. It took barely 2 minutes to cook. She transferred it directly into a wide, shallow pan where garlic and crushed red pepper had been blooming in olive oil. She tossed the pasta, adding a ladle of starchy pasta water to create a glossy, emulsified sauce. A handful of fresh parsley, a squeeze of lemon, a heavy grating of parmesan. It was aglio e olio. Peasant food. Fast, cheap, and fiercely flavorful. She plated it in a wide bowl and set it in front of him. She placed a silver fork beside it. Vincent looked at the food. The garlic smelled sharp and inviting, but the phantom cramp twisted harder. He stared at the pasta. For the first time in weeks, he didn't want to eat. He felt sick. The smell of copper and bone dust was still trapped in the back of his throat. "Eat," Nora said. It wasn't a request. It was an instruction. She stood opposite him, her arms crossed over her apron. "I can't," Vincent said. He sounded tired. "Not tonight." "Yes, you can." "Nora, I'm telling you, it won't stay down." He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfectly styled waves. "The adrenaline. It messes with my stomach. The doctors told me." "The doctors told you a lot of things, and you were dying," Nora interrupted. She leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the butcher block. She looked him dead in the eye. "You survived poison. You survived starvation. You just beat a man half to death in the next room. You are not going to let a bowl of noodles defeat you." Vincent stared at her. Nobody spoke to him like that. His underbosses didn't. His enemies certainly didn't. They feared him. They respected him. They coddled him when he was sick. Nora didn't coddle. She pushed. "You burn calories when you fight," she said, her tone softening slightly, shifting from a command to a truth. "You're running on empty. If you don't eat now, the nausea wins. Your brain will associate the violence with starving again. You have to break the cycle." She pushed the bowl a fraction of an inch closer to him. "Pick up the fork, Vincent." It was the first time she had used his name. It slipped out naturally, devoid of titles like Sir or Boss. Vincent looked at the fork. His hand was slightly unsteady as he picked it up. He twirled the pasta against the side of the bowl. He lifted a bite to his mouth. He chewed. The heat of the chili flakes hit his tongue, first followed by the sharp bite of garlic and the rich, salty depth of the cheese. It was assertive. It cut right through the lingering taste of adrenaline and iron. He swallowed. He waited. His stomach knotted, fighting the intrusion. The ghost of the poison whispered a threat. Vincent gripped the edge of the table. Nora reached across the island. She placed her hand over his. Her skin was warm, dusted with flour. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "Breathe," she instructed softly. "Just breathe through it. You're fine. It's just food. It's just fuel." Vincent focused on the warmth of her hand. He anchored himself to it. The kitchen around him, the hum of the refrigerator, the smell of garlic, the harsh fluorescent light grounded him in reality. He forced a slow breath in through his nose, out through his mouth. The knot in his stomach slowly untangled. The nausea receded, folding back into the dark corners of his mind. He looked down at her hand, covering his. Then he looked up into her eyes. They were brown, deep, and completely devoid of fear. She wasn't looking at a monster. She was looking at a patient. Vincent slipped his hand out from under hers. He picked up the fork again. He took another bite, then another. He ate steadily, deliberately, forcing his body to accept the nourishment. When the bowl was empty, he set the fork down. The cold sweat that had broken out on the back of his neck began to dry. "Thank you," he said. The words felt foreign in his mouth. Nora took the empty bowl. She carried it to the sink. "There's a price for this arrangement, you know." Vincent turned on his stool to watch her. "I paid your debt. You are compensated quite well." "I'm not talking about money," Nora said. She turned on the tap, rinsing the bowl. "I'm talking about the toll. I cook to keep you alive. You eat to stay strong. And when you are strong, you go upstairs and hurt people." She turned off the water. She dried her hands on her apron. "I feed the wolf," Nora said quietly. "And I have to live with knowing what the wolf does when he leaves the den." Vincent sat in silence. He didn't try to justify his actions. He didn't offer apologies or excuses. He was exactly what she said he was. A predator. He stood up. He walked slowly around the island. He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body. "You feed the wolf," Vincent agreed, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "And in return, the wolf ensures that nothing in this entire God-forsaken city will ever bare its teeth at you again. Ever." He held her gaze for a long moment, making sure she understood the weight of the promise. It wasn't a threat. It was a vow. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Nora alone with the silence, the flour, and the undeniable truth that she was no longer just a cleaner. She was the anchor, holding a king to the earth. Power is a living, breathing organism. It senses weakness like a shark senses blood in the water. For 6 months, the eastern seaboard had smelled Vincent's blood. Rivals who used to bow their heads in his presence had started making eye contact. Territories blurred. Tributes arrived late. Then the ghost put on a tailored suit and started breaking jaws again. The shift in the syndicate was palpable. The rumors of a miracle doctor or a secret blood transfusion circulated through the underground clubs and backroom poker games. Nobody suspected the truth. Nobody suspected that the terrifying resurrection of the Rossi family was being fueled by a 26-year-old girl making peasant stews in a basement kitchen, except for Arthur Sullivan. Sullivan ran the port authorities on the west side. He was a patient man. He had orchestrated the poisoning 6 months ago, using the ambitious underboss as a pawn. When Vincent survived, Sullivan simply waited for the starvation to finish the job. Now, watching Vincent rip back his lost territory with ruthless precision, Sullivan knew he had miscalculated. He needed to know why the king wasn't dead. He paid a lot of money to a guard on Vincent's payroll to find out. The answer he got was almost insulting. A cook. Nora felt the shift in the air before she saw it. She was at the specialty butcher shop on 4th Street. Enzo insisted on sending 2 men with her whenever she left the estate. They were massive, silent men who wore suits that didn't quite hide the bulges at their waistbands. They stood by the door trying to look inconspicuous and failing miserably. Nora picked through the display of veal shanks. She wanted to make osso buco. Vincent was working a massive logistical deal tonight, and he needed something heavy. Something that would anchor him. She pointed to the cuts she wanted. The butcher, a nervous man who sweated profusely whenever her escorts were around, scrambled to wrap them in butcher paper. Nora reached for her purse. A man bumped her shoulder. Hard. "Watch it!" one of her guards barked, stepping forward. The man was small, wearing a faded grey raincoat. He raised his hands in immediate apology. "My fault. Slippery floor." He didn't look at the guard. He looked directly into Nora's eyes. His pupils were blown wide. He smiled and his teeth were stained grey. "Keep him fed, sweetheart," the man whispered. The words were meant only for her. "He's gonna need the energy for the funeral." Before Nora could process the words, the man slipped past the heavy plastic flaps of the delivery exit and was gone. The guard grabbed her arm, his face pale. "Did he touch you? What did he say?" Nora's heart hammered a frantic, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She looked at the swinging plastic flaps. The air in the butcher shop suddenly felt incredibly thin. "Nothing." Nora lied, her voice tight. "He just bumped me. Let's go." She carried the wrapped meat to the black SUV, waiting at the curb. She sat in the back seat, staring out the tinted windows as the city blurred past. She clutched the paper-wrapped veal to her chest. It felt cold. She understood Vincent's world in theory. She saw the blood on his knuckles. She heard the bones break. But it had always been his world. She was just the observer. The safe harbor. The man in the raincoat had shattered that illusion. They knew about her. The wolves in the dark knew where the king kept his lifeline. When she returned to the estate, the kitchen felt different. The heavy stainless steel doors, the massive walk-in freezer, the hanging iron pots, they didn't look like a sanctuary anymore. They looked like a bunker. She started prepping the osso buco. She chopped celery, carrots, and onions with mechanical precision. She dredged the veal in flour. She heated the olive oil in her heavy Dutch oven. The familiar hiss of searing meat usually calmed her. Today, it just sounded like static. The door unlocked. Vincent walked in. He was on the phone, his voice a low, commanding rumble. He waved a dismissive hand, ending the call, and tossed the device onto the butcher block island. He loosened his silk tie. He stopped. He looked at her. Vincent was a man who survived by reading the microscopic tells of liars and thieves. He saw the tension in Nora's shoulders instantly. He saw the way she held the tongs too tight, her knuckles white. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing," Nora said. She flipped the meat. The oil spat. Traffic was barred. Vincent walked around the island. He didn't stop until he was standing right beside her at the stove. He reached out and turned off the gas burner. The blue flame vanished. The sizzling died down. "Look at me," Vincent said. Nora kept her eyes on the pan. "I have to brown the meat, Vincent. It ruins the flavor if I stop." "Nora." His voice was soft, but it carried the absolute weight of a command. "Look at me." She turned her head. Her eyes were bright with unspilled anxiety. Vincent's jaw tightened. "Who spoke to you?" She couldn't lie to him. Not when he looked at her like that. "A man. At the butcher. He bumped into me." He said to keep you fed because you'll need the energy for the funeral. Vincent didn't react physically. He didn't shout. He didn't punch the wall. But the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The exhaustion in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. Enzo sent 2 men with you, Vincent said quietly. They were by the door. He slipped past them. It was crowded. Vincent stared at the stainless steel hood above the stove. He was doing the math. Sullivan. It has to be Sullivan. He's the only one with the resources to track my security details so closely. He looked back down at her. He saw the fear she was trying so hard to hide. He reached out his large hand, wrapping around her wrist. His thumb brushed over her pulse point. It was racing. I told you, Vincent said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. Nothing in this city will ever bare its teeth at you. I meant it. He let go of her wrist and grabbed his phone off the island. He hit a speed dial button. Enzo, lock the estate down. Nobody comes in. Nobody goes out. Bring the 2 idiots who took Nora to the market into the basement. I want a word with them. He hung up. He looked at the half-seared meat in the pot. Leave the food, Vincent ordered. We're going upstairs to the vault. It's a panic room. You stay there until I handle this. Nora shook her head. I'm not hiding in a steel box. You have 30 armed men outside. 30 armed men didn't stop a rat from whispering in your ear today, Vincent snapped. The control was slipping, revealing the raw protective fury underneath. Move! Before Nora could argue, the lights in the kitchen flickered. Then they went completely black. The silence was absolute. The heavy hum of the industrial refrigerators died. The exhaust fans stopped. The kitchen was plunged into a suffocating, pitch-black darkness. Vincent moved instantly. He grabbed Nora by the waist, his arm a band of iron, and pulled her hard against his chest. He dragged her down, crouching behind the thick wooden butcher block island. Don't make a sound, he breathed directly into her ear. Nora's heart slammed against her ribs. She couldn't see anything. The darkness was absolute. But she could feel Vincent. His body was a coiled spring radiating heat and lethal intent. A heavy metallic clunk echoed through the room. The service elevator, the one used strictly for bringing bulk groceries down from the loading dock. It operated on a separate analog hydraulic line. Someone had bypassed the main power grid. The metal grate of the elevator slid open. Soft footsteps stepped onto the tile. 2 sets. Maybe 3. They weren't using flashlights. They were professionals. They had night vision. They had the advantage. Vincent reached down to his ankle. Nora heard the soft whisper of leather. A backup piece. He pressed his back against the side of the wooden island, calculating the angles. He knew the layout of his kitchen by heart, but he was blind. Check the pantry, a low voice whispered in the dark. Footsteps moved to their left. Vincent's grip on Nora's arm tightened. He was waiting. Let them separate. Nora felt around the floor blindly. Her hand brushed against something cold and heavy. The cast-iron skillet she had used for breakfast. It had been sitting on the lower rack of the island. She wrapped her fingers around the handle. She didn't know what she was going to do with it, but holding it made her feel slightly less like a victim. A faint blue glow illuminated the far wall. One of the men had bumped into the stove, accidentally twisting the knob of the gas burner. The pilot light ignited the residual gas, casting a weak, flickering blue light across the room. It was enough. Vincent saw the silhouette moving toward the walk-in freezer. In a fraction of a second, he stood up, raised his weapon, and fired twice. The suppressed gun made 2 sharp thwip sounds. The silhouette dropped hard to the floor. "Contact!" a voice yelled from the right. Gunfire erupted, not suppressed. Deafening, roaring blasts that shattered the hanging copper pots and chewed through the wooden island inches above their heads. Splinters rained down on Nora's hair. She screamed, covering her head with her free hand, pressing herself flat against the tile. Vincent returned fire. The blue light from the stove flared, as a bullet clipped the gas line, sending a jet of flame shooting upward. The kitchen was suddenly illuminated in erratic, nightmarish flashes of orange and blue. Nora saw the second shooter. He was wearing tactical gear and heavy goggles. He was flanking the island, moving fast, his weapon raised. Vincent was pinned down, reloading his small ankle gun. He wouldn't be fast enough. The shooter rounded the corner of the island. He leveled the barrel at Vincent's chest. Nora didn't think. Instinct raw and desperate hijacked her brain. She swung the heavy cast-iron skillet from the floor, putting all her weight behind it. It was the same motion she used to haul a heavy bucket of water. The solid iron connected with the side of the shooter's knee with a sickening, wet crunch. The man shrieked, his leg buckling instantly. His shot went wild, burying itself into the ceiling above them. He collapsed forward, his heavy rifle clattering to the floor. Vincent didn't hesitate. He lunged. He didn't use the gun. He used his bare hands. He grabbed the tactical vest, hauled the man upward, and drove his knee into the man's face. The shooter went limp, sliding to the floor in a heap of Kevlar and blood. The silence that followed was deafening. The gas line hissed, fueling the erratic orange flame against the wall. The smell of sulfur and burnt copper filled the air. Vincent stood over the body. He was breathing in ragged, heavy gasps. He kept his weapon aimed at the dark hallway, waiting for more. Nothing came. Enzo's men must have secured the perimeter upstairs. Vincent lowered the gun. He turned to look at Nora. She was sitting on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest, the heavy iron skillet resting beside her. She was covered in wood splinters and dust. She looked terrified, fragile, and utterly out of place in the carnage. Vincent dropped the gun. He fell to his knees in front of her. He reached out his large hands, gripping her shoulders, pulling her forward until her face was pressed against his chest. He held her, tight, frantic. It was an embrace born of sheer, raw panic. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his voice shaking. The control was gone. The mob boss was gone. He was just a man, terrified of losing his anchor. "Nora, talk to me. Are you hit?" "No," she mumbled against his shirt. "I'm okay." Vincent buried his face in her hair. He let out a long, shuddering breath. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He pulled back just enough to look at her face. He saw the iron skillet on the floor. He saw the man with the shattered knee. He looked back at her, his dark eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of awe and guilt. "You saved my life," he whispered. Nora looked up at him. She reached out her hand, trembling as she touched the side of his neck. Her fingers came away wet. "Vincent," she said, her voice dropping, "you're bleeding." Vincent looked down. A dark stain was spreading across the left side of his crisp white shirt, just below his collarbone. One of the splintered bullets had caught him. He touched it. He didn't seem to care. He only cared that she was breathing. The heavy doors to the kitchen burst open. Flashlights cut through the smoke. Enzo and 4 heavily armed men poured into the room. "Boss," Enzo yelled, scanning the bodies. "Secure the house." Vincent ordered, his voice snapping back to authority. "They used the service elevator grid. Check the basement. Nobody leaves." Enzo saw the blood on Vincent's shirt. "We need a doctor. I'll get the medic down here." "No," Vincent said. He stood up, wincing slightly as the torn muscle protested. He reached down and pulled Nora to her feet. "Clear these bodies out of my kitchen." Now, an hour later, the bodies were gone. The blood had been mopped up. The bullet holes remained gaping wounds in the stainless steel and the beautiful wooden island. The backup generator was humming, bathing the room in harsh, fluorescent light again. Vincent sat on his usual stool. He refused to go upstairs to the infirmary. The syndicate medic, a nervous man with a black bag, had come down to the kitchen. He extracted the bullet fragment, stitched the shallow groove near Vincent's collarbone, and taped a heavy gauze pad over it. The medic packed his bag and practically ran out the door. Nora stood by the sink. Her hands were washed clean, but she still felt the phantom weight of the iron skillet. She watched Vincent. He was pale again. The blood loss had taken a toll, but it wasn't the deathly pallor of starvation. It was the exhaustion of war. She looked around the ruined kitchen. The ossobuco in the Dutch oven was ruined, dusted with drywall debris. The hanging pots were dented or destroyed. "You should go to bed," Nora said quietly. Vincent shook his head. He didn't look at her. He looked at his hands resting on the counter. "I can't sleep. If I close my eyes, I'll see that man aiming a gun at your chest." Nora walked over to the island. She didn't stand across from him this time. She walked around the butcher block and stood right beside him. "They came for you," Vincent said, his voice laced with bitter self-hatred. "Sullivan knew. He knew you were the only thing keeping me upright. My enemies used to attack my shipments. Now they attack my cook." He finally looked at her. "I dragged you into the mud, Nora. I promised you safety, and I brought a war into your kitchen." Nora looked at the gauze on his shoulder. She reached out and gently rested her fingertips just above the bandage. Vincent's breath hitched. "You didn't drag me anywhere," Nora said. Her voice was firm, steady. "I walked into this kitchen because I was starving too. I needed to survive just as much as you did." She stepped back. She went to the pantry. Miraculously, the lower shelves were untouched. She grabbed a fresh loaf of crusty bread. She walked to the counter, pulled a heavy bottle of cold-pressed olive oil and a small dish of flaky sea salt. She brought them to the island. She poured a pool of the dark green oil onto a small ceramic plate. She pinched the salt, letting it fall into the oil. She tore the bread in half with her bare hands. It wasn't a meal. It was communion. She pushed the plate toward him. "Eat," she said softly. Vincent looked at the bread. The adrenaline crash was hitting him hard. His stomach felt tight, but not with nausea. With hunger. A deep, hollow need to replenish what he had lost. He didn't pick up a piece of bread. Instead, he reached out and took Nora's hand. He pulled her closer. Not with the frantic, violent grip from the shootout. He pulled her with a slow, deliberate tenderness that felt entirely foreign on his hands. He guided her to stand between his knees. He looked up at her. The ruthless king was gone. The starving man was gone. There was only Vincent. "I don't just need you to cook for me," he whispered. The confession cost him every ounce of his pride, but he gave it willingly. "I need you to stay. Not as my chef. Not as an employee. Just stay." Nora felt a tear break loose and track down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She looked at the man who commanded an army, asking her for the one thing his money couldn't buy. She reached down, picked up a piece of the torn bread, dipped it into the salted oil and held it to his lips. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Vincent opened his mouth. He took the bread from her fingers. He chewed his eyes, never leaving hers. It was the simplest thing she had ever fed him. Bread, oil, salt. It tasted like salvation. He reached up, cupping the back of her neck, pulling her down until her forehead rested against his. In the center of a bullet-riddled kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of a violent life, they shared the bread. They shared the quiet. They had both been starving, and finally they were both full. Thank you so much for reading this story. If you felt the tension, the slow burn romance, and the raw emotion of Vincent and Nora's journey, please do me a huge favor. Hit that like button and share this video with someone who loves a gritty, emotional Mafia romance. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on the next intense storytelling session. Drop a comment below and tell me your favorite moment from the kitchen. Your support means everything and keeps these stories coming. Stay safe and see you in the next one.